All right, if we could get settled in, we'd like to get started. Before we start the panel, we have one announcement to make. I'd like to ask Dr. Rick Cleary to come up. We had the Student Poster Award, which we'd like to announce. Dr. Cleary.
Gee, thank you, Scott. Very formal introduction. You can call me Rick. First of all, before we do this, I'd like to say, a lot of us go to a lot of conferences, and it's very rare to go to one where the quality of talks and posters was so uniformly very, very high. So I'd like to just give the organizers a hand right now, because it really has been, I think, an exceptional day. So thank you to everyone involved in putting this on. We thought my fellow judges, Drew Thomas and Kevin Rader, and I were judging the student poster competition. I want to make clear that the definition of student poster for this particular competition is student involved. Doesn't have to be strictly a student poster. I mean, he worked with faculty advisors, and we really looked at the quality of the posters, and we thought they were exceptional. We actually, you could make a good joke about maybe using some of the modeling techniques we've learned today to rate the posters, but we didn't quite have that much time, and we did it a little more subjectively. Among the many, many outstanding posters, we decided that the first place poster was How to Get from Pitch to Plinth, Modeling Stature Subject Choice in U.S. Baseball and English Soccer by Fionn Thomas, Chris Stride, and Josh Prehejian. So thank you. Congratulations to them. I think what sold the deal was when they told us that the person in baseball without a statue who they rank most likely to have one was Carl Yastrzemski. So a little local flavor. So congratulations.
Thank you. All right. So it's been a tradition at our NESSIS symposiums to have a panel discussion to end the day. And today our panel discussion is on basketball analytics and strategizing in the NBA front office. Hopefully we're actually going to have some NBA basketball soon. So what I'd like to do is introduce our moderator for the panel, who will then introduce our panelists, and we're going to have a discussion. So our moderator today is Zach Lowe, who has written for Sports Illustrated's NBA blog, The Point Forward, since the beginning of the 2010-2011 season. He's been a full-time journalist both at newspapers and magazines since 2004 and freelanced about the NBA for various outlets until landing at SI. And he's a graduate of Dartmouth College from up in my home state of New Hampshire, up in Hanover, a beautiful place. It is a very beautiful place. Unfortunately, Dartmouth College has not made the NCAA basketball tournament once in Zach's lifetime. He holds master's degrees in U.S. history and journalism and lives in New York City, and I'll hand it off to Zach Lowe. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here. My sister went to Harvard. I did not, which is a bit of a sore spot, but it's nice to be here anyway. And this has been I've really enjoyed my day here. It's been nice. If you're an NBA guy like me, this panel is pretty much as good as it gets. So I'm just going to do my best to get out of the way and let them talk. Starting immediately to my right is Sam Hinkie. He's the executive vice president of basketball operations for the Rockets, where he leads the team in considerable analytic efforts. The Rockets, as anyone knows, are among the 5 or 6 teams really at the forefront of this stuff. And prior to joining Houston during the 2004-2005 season, Sam advised NFL teams on ways to use statistical analysis to improve decision-making. He began his career as a consultant for Bain & Company, a leading global strategy consulting firm. Next to him is Roland Beech, currently the director of basketball analytics for the 2011 NBA champion Dallas Mavericks. He is known as the first basketball statistical analyst to have a seat on the coaching bench, which is pretty cool, and was praised by Mark Cuban, the owner of the Mavs, as being an important part of the team's championship run. He founded the popular statistics website 82games.com, which he does not update as frequently anymore now that he works for the Mavericks. And immediately to his right is Kenny Atkinson, currently an assistant coach for the New York Knicks. Before that, he serves as director of player development for the Rockets, where he met Sam, and he also served 3 years as director of player development and assistant coach for the Paris Basket Racing Club in France. He played professionally for 13 seasons in Italy, France, Germany, and Spain. This is a pretty awesome panel. We're lucky to have these guys here. It's funny, Moneyball came out this weekend. Every outlet is writing 25 things about Moneyball. To me and everyone in this room, the Moneyball argument is over. The numbers have won. The fact that we're still reading columns about statistics ruining sports is ridiculous. And so the next argument, the next sort of debate that you hear whenever you go to these conferences is, okay, so the numbers have won. We agree that numbers improve sports and they improve decision-making. How do we actually implement that decision-making? How do we get from the numbers to the coaches to the players to the basketball court? And that's what I want to start off with these guys. And I was talking to Sam the other day. Sam works for the Rockets. His general manager, Daryl Morey, has been at the forefront of this stuff for a long time. There may be one or two at most more sort of sophisticated analytical teams, probably none, actually. And so Sam and I were talking about all these subjects, and he was talking about how he and his department, with all these numbers and all these geniuses, talk to the coaches who come from a totally different background and are geniuses in their own right, and the two groups speak different language. And he said something that I found very interesting as he was talking about how to sort of get in the coach's ear. And he said, the way you put it was, I don't try to teach anybody anything. That's a way of doing things that I don't agree with. I don't try and teach anybody, and I thought we'd start by sort of getting at what you meant by that, and from there go into sort of your day-to-day about, how you translate the numbers to the coaching staff to the court.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a pretty high standard. One I don't reach all the time, I'll say, but it is something we talk about a lot, and I talk about a lot, that solving their problems is what we're there to do, and trying to help where we can, which, as I think we'll get to sometime today, is limited where we can, but where we can help them and where we know they're focusing on a particular decision or taking in various pieces of input as they think about either making a change or sticking to a decision that they've made for a long time, that's the moment we try to arrive. Not before, not when they're not sort of in the moment to be thinking about that. These guys are busy professionals with a whole bunch of stress that live in the public eye and have a lot to think about every day, and so we try pretty hard to make sure that when we're sort of in their way, that it's really useful, that we're in front of them with something that is tangible for them, right then, in the way they want to learn about it, for something that's relevant to them soon. Because as soon as you start talking theory, they're busy enough to sort of push it to the side and say, let's talk about that in the off season. But during the season, they're more like generals that are in the middle of the war looking for real answers, because another game comes 18 hours later, and they're looking for answers right then.
Can you talk a bit about how you, like, concretely on a day-to-day basis, and Roland, maybe you too, you're on the bench. I mean, how do you catch the coaches at the right time? What kind of documents do you give them? And do they ask you questions, or do you go to them with almost answers, saying, I've noticed this, here's X, Y, and Z?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I've been fortunate that I got the opportunity to really join the coaching staff as the kind of stats coach. And the first year, it really was a lot of kind of learning how to communicate effectively, and certainly I wasn't going in there aggressively, forcing my ideas on people. I was really trying to understand, as Sam was saying, the challenges they really face and the intensity of what's going on. So I was, often more reactive, I think, at the start. Now I've kind of built up my credibility that it's a bit of both. I certainly am very responsive to anything they're thinking of that they want to come up with. But at the same time, I now have, my own kind of content I'm bringing to them. But a lot of it is in, learning the whole kind of coaching world and communicating effectively with the people.
I'd say just maybe a tangible point on that. We just pay attention to the way they all live. So like some of our coaches, if they're big texters with their kids who are playing hoops around the country, like if they ask us a question, I'll text them back, and I'll text them at 10 at night or 7 in the morning or whenever we've got the answer. Others, that doesn't work. Others, they sort of focus in a different way. Some of our guys, we would figure out that they didn't actually begin preparing in a really heavy way for the next game until the last game was over. And so we would just wait until what we thought was the most opportune moment. So as soon as they would sit down on the team plane in their seat, then someone would appear sort of out of nowhere with a 20-page document and set it in their lap. And like, we're about to take off, your cell phone's about to not work anymore, you're about to be sort of stuck in this plane for 2 hours, and it just so turns out you're quite worried about the game you're playing tomorrow. And so at that moment is the moment we would give them relevant info. We didn't send them to some database and ask them to log in or send them a complicated email that they couldn't even navigate their way through sometimes. Instead, we'd say, here's a piece of paper, flip through it, and maybe it takes 5 minutes, maybe it takes 20, but this is a time in which it might make sense for you and the way you learn to sort of take this input.
Kenny, you're sort of come from a different place where you are a player turned coach and have sort of embraced advanced statistics as a means for improving individual players in the team. But you're a coach, you're on the court. How would you want this information presented to you? If you had at the Knicks somebody like Roland or somebody like Sam or somebody like the guys in the audience who are just geniuses with numbers who can do things that you and I can't even begin to understand, how would, say the Knicks are trying to hire somebody like that, what qualities do you want in that person? How do you want them to interact with you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, first of all, I think for you guys and for this statistical revolution, the incredible thing about this being in the trenches with the guys is the amazing thing about it is how receptive they are, especially the younger players, especially the smarter players. Like, you would think they would be, a little resistant to this numbers revolution, but I am amazed, I am overwhelmed. I cannot begin to tell you guys how helpful guys like these are. Now, I look at a lot of public information. There's, 82games.com, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. But I just want to make that clear. Like, I would say the players are much more receptive than even the coaches, because I think a lot of us coaches have been doing the same things for a long period of time, and the younger guys are a little more open to new ideas. So that's exciting for everyone here. As far as when to present, the information and how to translate that information to the players, it's a feel. And I think you made a good point, Zach, or Sam did it. You're more guiding them than giving them direct orders. So you might present, just one shot chart on a Friday to show a guy, hey, these are areas where you can improve your shooting. Look at these areas. Look at the chart here on your shooting percentage from this particular area, and and it's one little bit of information, but they're overwhelmed. Another day it might, like Sam said, you might give them a packet of 20 pages on the advanced scouting report for one of the teams you're playing in your conference. So I definitely think you're more of a guide to these, especially these guys at the elite level, and you're always challenging them intellectually. Like, I think that's where these guys don't get enough credit. Like, you're always trying to, how can we get these guys, better here? And I tell you that it's unbelievable what's going on, and I know you guys know it, but being in the trenches, just be happy to know that these guys are really receptive to what's going on.
So on a day-to-day basis, what are you doing? How do you what numbers do you find interesting? What do you want? Do you ask yourself questions and just say, I'm curious about X, Y, and Z, can I find it?
The problem is I have about 10 questions every day. No, probably every 10 minutes. So there's so much stuff, like there's thinking about the game, whether you're watching video or breaking down video, there's so much. It was like the JP Riccardi was saying today. He has an idea, and he looks to his analyst and says, hey, can we get this done? And there's a lot of ideas. I think the problem, Zach, is prioritizing what are the most important things. But what I try to do is try to really get it down to one or two things and attack that the best I can, and then get it to the players, get the information to the players.
Roland, you have sort of gained this fame as the guy on the bench, the guy who made it to the bench, and wore the championship hat and got doused in champagne or whatever happened. I think people are curious. I know I am. Like, are you, when you're on the bench in real time? Now we know you guys can produce all this pregame stuff. What can you do in real time? Can you talk to the coach in real time? And what are you doing during? Can you be crunching numbers during the game? Are we at that point yet for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely tracking a lot of stuff during a game. In fact, people comment that I'll be often be the guy looking down as the ball's like going the other direction because I'm writing stuff down. But definitely a lot of my focus is more like video review after the game and that kind of thing. The live tracking is difficult. There is a lot I track, but in our coaching staff, we have a very experienced coaching staff. We had Rick, obviously, and Terry and Dwayne have both been head coaches too. And there can be too many voices in the intensity of a game. So I pick my spots to kind of interject in the real flow of a game. Certainly at halftime, all the coaches will meet and we'll discuss things. But I'm not super aggressive in-game, just because it's very difficult. I mean, you're dealing often with very small sample sizes of whatever happens. You can certainly notice things in maybe the coverages aren't working, or maybe things aren't being done the way you had, planned to do them. But a lot of what I'm tracking in real time is also for the kind of the quick read at halftime and the quick read after the game. And then for me, the majority of the work is actually after the game. We get nicely cut up video that you can just go through and really cram out a lot of information and nuance. It's a lot of nuance kind of detail that really is hopefully what's making a difference.
How's your interaction with the coaching staff? Do you talk to them every day, every other day? Are you talking to Rick Carlisle, the coach of the Mavericks? Is he, I guess both of you, what people are curious about is, how did you build up that credibility with the coaches? How did you get these guys to accept you as voices that they should listen to? Did that take years? And sort of what are your day-to-day conversations with them like now?
I mean, I'm fully a part of the coaching staff, so I'm in every coaches meeting, every practice I'm there, every interaction. So yeah, I'm constantly involved. The credibility definitely took a while. I mean, this was my second year there on a full-time basis, and I remember the first year I was there in training camp. Early on, we had a little practice game where you have teams and they do some kind of shooting game. And I was put with the menial task of counting baskets for one of the teams. And somehow I got distracted and screwed up the count, and the losing team has to run laps. And I became known as the effing stats guy who can't count. So at that point, my credibility was a little low. But I've fortunately progressed from there to where, now, I mean, the second year I really felt like I knew how to kind of anticipate what Rick was looking for and the kind of things that you could introduce at the meeting the next morning or something that would really be productive. So it's definitely a learning experience, and I would never downplay the amount of knowledge and work the coaches have. I mean, a lot of people can be a bit arrogant when they come in, and I was never that way. I mean, I felt like the coaches had amazing knowledge already, and I'm really there almost to just kind of increase awareness a bit of things that are going on. I mean, I'm always amazed by Rick's memory. He can recall like a play call he ran in a game 2 years ago and what happens, and sometimes we'll like call him on it, and so we'll dig out the video, and there it is in the third quarter. It's just as he said it was. But even with that, the numbers gives you a level of information that just is, concrete in a way, and so a lot of it's really bringing to attention, the problem areas and the good areas. So it's a lot of kind of that approach.
Do you want to talk about, I mean, Houston is it's a similar organization in a lot of ways. I mean, how were you received at first by the coaching staff, and how do you have to be right a certain amount of times for them to sort of say, maybe we should listen to this guy, or how do you get listened to, I guess?
When I first joined, Jeff Van Gundy was our coach, and Jeff is he was really hungry for this sort of thing. Jeff's played basketball at Yale, and until he couldn't play enough minutes, and so he transferred away from Yale so he could play more minutes. Like That's sort of just the way Jeff thinks. So he was quite hungry early on. And then Coach Adelman came, and I would say he was really open. He wasn't maybe as hungry as Jeff was for it, but he was really open and had a lot of experience at the time. I think 16 years in the NBA at the time. I would say just a lot of like old-fashioned humility will go a long ways to just tell people the truth and to tell people some powerful lessons that don't seem so powerful. Just like, I don't know. Like, you're asking me a question, and we went away and worked on it, and no one slept in the last 3 days. And I've got nothing. I've got nothing for you that's of interest. So we're going to lean on your 2,000 games of NBA experience. That's our best guide here. I'll help you when I can, but I know nothing in this situation, and we don't have any data that will help you. Other times, we'll go and say, we looked at this, and there's a particular decision. You haven't been thinking about this much, and it's clear. It's clear this is the way an NBA coach should do it. That's what the data suggests. And it turns out you do it like 98% of the time. And so what we're here to say is like, never worry about that decision again. Like it's just think of that like brushing your teeth. Like do that every single time. Don't do it 98, do it 100. And never worry. We'll support you fully, even if it doesn't work, even if we lose the game because of it. It's exactly the right decision. Don't worry about that. Like that's pretty powerful for a coach who's really busy with a whole bunch of stuff to say like, you know, all the people in our organization have thought about this and everyone agrees with my own intuition over the years, and great, I'll try to figure out how to get to this player and stop thinking about that little measly decision. But then if you do that enough, when you do show up and say, I'm really confident that this is right, and I'm really confident that if we did this, that it will help us in this way, they listen. Because so many times you've not taken the opportunity to boast when you truly don't know anything, and so many times you've said your judgment is our best guide, that on the few times, and I find it's only a few, the few times when you show up and say, we've looked at this 10 different ways, we're happy for you to beat it up if you see things differently, but we think we've taken everything into account, and this looks like a better way to play. I think they really perk up then because of the experiences prior to that.
That's what I was going to ask all three of you, and in whatever order you wish. I mean, there must be a time, multiple times, that you have found something in your research, and which is very different between the three of you, that is totally counterintuitive, either to conventional wisdom, to what your coach thinks, to what the team does on a regular basis, and that to me strikes me as the sort of when things get sticky. Is like my coach believes this, the numbers say this, he's like really hard and fast in that belief, and the numbers are very clear about this. Can you give examples? I mean, is that conversation easier than I think it is? And do any of you have examples that come to mind as you found something that just, and obviously they can't say the names of any current players or anything like that, but you found something that, is just totally counterintuitive, and then how do you present that without coming off, like you guys have said, you keep saying humility, and sort of the cliche is the stats guy comes in and says, I know everything, you guys are all, I'm smarter than you. How do you present that in a way that works, and can you give any real life examples?
What's shocking to me is the general media perception of, for example, a player's strengths or a player's weaknesses. And when you start getting the statistical information and the data, you're like, wait a second, this guy's supposed to be a great pull-up jump shooter or a great, finisher at the rim, or he's a great finisher. And then you come over and you get the information and you're looking at it. And as a coach, you have a lot of experience, but that's not, and I'm telling you, that's not always, you're not always correct with that. Something you assume. For example, a guy's a great finisher. Well, you look at the numbers, he really isn't. So the common media perception out there isn't always true. So every day I'm seeing stuff like, wow, that guy doesn't finish so well, or that guy's not a great, I thought this guy was much better than this guy in terms of pull-up jump shooting or shooting off two dribbles or whatever, or pick and roll play, whatever it is. So Zach, constantly, I would say every day you're finding out something new if you really delve into the details. I don't know if you guys have the same experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing kind of along those lines, I mean, one of our big debates is, you can look at a possession and you're like, the shot may go in or out, but you're also trying to say, was that a good possession or a bad possession? And this is where it can get kind of, subjective. And one of the coaches will think like it was a great shot, and I'll be maybe a little bit more delicate, and maybe it wasn't. And you can understand why they might have a perception that way, because you can see in practice people who aren't even shooters making like 20 in a row of that kind of shot. But yet I know in the context of an actual game situation, that shot maybe is a bit lower percentage than that. But no, I mean, I'm very delicate in trying to introduce, and it's, obviously there's a ton of knowledge these coaches have in 20 years or something. I'm not going to come in and act like I know it. But you can provide data to support things one way or the other. I mean, you can look at, a screen coverage, and by having actually tracked every screen, you can know kind of a pretty specific number as to whether it's been effective or not. And it's not just kind of a feel at that point, it's an actual hard data point to look at. So
I would say this has been brought up in conferences like this before. Your first inclination when you find something that you've done that seems way out of whack with conventional wisdom is to do it again, because you're probably wrong. You probably did something wrong. Like Mike Zarin was here a couple of years ago and talked about, like, the longer you do this, the more and more respect you have for the people who do it. Because if you've been a coach for 20 years or you've been in a gym for the proverbial 10,000 hours, but for a lot of these guys it's like 30 or 40,000 hours, like, you get a lot of stuff right. And so I would say the very first thing, if I do some stuff, or if one of our guys brings something to me that says, like, ooh, what we found is that, the NBA game is just played totally wrong in this little situation, I would say, like, let's beat this up. Like, we're not taking this to the coaches right now. Like, let's beat this up and make sure, because often what you'll find is, like, there's another consideration in there that you hadn't thought of that makes this sort of sum total of what NBA coaches have decided to do, especially the good ones, over several decades, to be pretty darn right. We find that a lot. So I would say it's really rare when you have something really, really big. Now, things that, like samples, that's one where that happens a lot, like you're saying with shots, where the sort of thing that, like, no human, no matter how smart, could do. Like, I watched this guy shoot 3 of these finishes tonight, and I watched him last week, but the truth is I can't keep track of if he made 65 out of 100 or 50 out of 100. All I know is over the last few months he shot 100, and I thought a lot of them went in. That's the sort of thing where data can really help and might surprise people, but it's only because it's so hard to keep track of all that in your head. Finding something about decision making or about a particular moment in the game that's just dead wrong, I think are pretty rare.
Yeah, what's something that coaches are doing right that either we think they might not be doing right, like a situational thing that is controversial, but that once you dig into it, you're like, wow, they're actually intuitively or because of their experience, they're nailing this, and I could put 10 stat guys on this and they'd come to the exact same conclusion.
I mean, one thing for me when I got there was, I mean, obviously people pay a lot of attention to lineups. I'm not actually that focused on lineups. But there's a sense you play your best lineup at the start of the game, and that's just the way you do it. And that's not necessarily something Rick believes in. He's actually much more into making sure the rotation works all the way through a game. And I'm not sure that's quite what you're looking for, because you can explore that a lot of ways. But that's definitely kind of an area where a lot of people in the blogging world or the media or something will say, this is their best lineup, they should be starting it. And it's a more complex issue than that. And I think, the coaches often have a great read on what's needed to really actually optimize a team kind of in the course of a game.
In an email, Kenny, you brought it up in an email to me. How reliable is the data that we get? And whenever I go to a conference like this, there's always some new fancy adjusted plus minus formula that I can't understand without someone telling me exactly step by step what it is, that tells me that player X, who I think is really good, is actually just killing his team. But then I go to another conference and there's another adjusted plus minus system that tells me that player X is like one of the best guys in the league. And then me, the idiot writer guy, I have no idea what to think about player X anymore. And sometimes you brought up to me the Synergy video logging service that logs every play in an NBA game and then makes judgments on who did what well and badly on that play. And I'm with you. I watched some of those videos, and I think they mislabel them. I mean, so at what point? I mean, at what point do we just have so much data that the coach or even someone in your position just throws up their hands? I don't even know, what's true anymore. And how do you pick out all of these posters? What do you trust? What do you not trust? And sort of talk about the reliability issue a little bit.
I will qualify. First of all, Synergy does a great job. I mean,
They're indispensable.
Please,
They're
like,
indispensable.
Synergy, you're great, and you do great. And I think that's like, for me, it's a big dilemma for a coach, especially when you get down to tracking stuff that you better be pretty experienced. As a coach, you better be in it a pretty long time to understand what's going on. I can just, dilemma we're considering now, how do you play pick and rolls? How do you defend pick and rolls? Does the person know who's tracking pick and roll defense? Do they know what a hard show is? Do they know? And our vocabulary might be different. Their perception of what a hard show is, and are we a flat show, hard show? We have there's so many different ways to play it. So, number one, can you track it? Can you track that stuff? Can we get a uniform way of tracking it? And then, can we get somebody that is competent and understands, they can't understand what we're doing, but get a general idea of what good pick and roll defense is. So that's really, the raw numbers, I think it's pretty, I trust that, and I have no problem. It's the tracking stuff that I have an issue with, and I just wish, for me to break down a video of our game, just in general, our video, it takes me 2 hours. Now, if I took every player and watched just their individual possessions, if I had to go through 9 players, say, I can't tell you how long would that take. It would take, do the math. It'd take me 50 hours to get through a video. If you really wanted to do it, and that's like, to me, utopia. If you had somebody really competent tracking every action and really getting down to the crux of what's going on, and I don't know how you do that, and that's a big dilemma.
Yeah, I do a lot of tracking, and it is difficult. The first year I was really learning the lingo in a lot of ways, and what's actually going to be seen, because a lot of it becomes subjective. What's actually going to be seen as a quality hard show versus a failed hard show or something like that. And so it is actually very nuanced. I think that's, again, some people think this is really simple stuff, and it's actually very, very touchy in a way, and you got to get it just right for how the people who are going to interpret it are gonna want it done. So, but I think that's a big factor is getting the tracking in the way that is going to be trusted, so it's actually something that people will use and rely on rather than be skeptical of. So.
What about the sort of, maybe this is just me speaking as a non-stats guy really, or not nearly on your guys' level, but what about this, I feel like sometimes there's so much data out there that I'm at the risk of believing something that is totally inaccurate because, someone's adjusted plus minus formula just fundamentally doesn't work in a way that I don't understand. Is that, does it come down to I trust the guys in my shop because I know that they do things a certain way that I agree with? How do you go about sifting through all the numbers that are available and deciding what to trust when pieces of information contradict each other?
I'll take that one. Everybody's looking at me. I would say we have one advantage in that we have more than, say, one person in our front office that's doing this, and so oftentimes you can sort of cross-check each other, so that's sort of helpful. It's not a peer-reviewed journal like you'd see in academia, but having multiple people that you can have the conversation with and say, this is what I'm thinking, here's the assumption I made, take this data and beat it up another way and see if you can poke holes in it. We would do a lot of that. I would say if anything new comes out in the public domain, whether it's in various blogs or message boards or the like, we might be mildly impressed by it, but the very first thing we would do is see how predictive it is over time. And if it's not very predictive over time, then even if it matches up with your own ranking of players on adjusted plus minus from a year ago or something, we would often say, like, yeah, it was wonderfully right in the last 3 months, but it was terrible in 08, 09. So, like, okay, great. We get something to rank after the fact. I want something that ranks 11-12 or 12-13. Those are interesting. So I would say we would have a pretty high standard to what would get into our decision making, because people would beat it up a lot along the way.
There's so much in the public domain now that is pretty sophisticated. I mean, so many numbers I can sift through just like a regular guy and do my best to figure out what they mean. But so much is out there. Obviously, what you guys do on the team level is proprietary. But I'm just sort of curious. Like, there's so much sophisticated data out there. What's, in very general terms, what's left? What are you curious about? What are some of the next things that need more research done about them, or stuff like that, stuff that, areas that are there for study that maybe aren't in the public domain so much yet.
I just went, but I'll take that one. I feel like there is a ton left. I mean, there is like so much that we don't know about the game in general. Basketball in particular is massively complicated, like all 5 players, not considering emotion and fans and sleep habits and all the other things that play into a player. I mean, just the game itself. Like, there's a whole bunch of things we don't measure very well. We measure, free throw percentage and some simple stuff that's pretty isolated, great. But there's a lot about, team defense and individual defense and playing the game in a different way that literally we don't have much for right now. We don't have enough measurements to be able to do it. If right now a lot of our teams rely on largely play-by-play data, and so you sort of get like a rhythm of, every 15 or 20 seconds you get some info from the data. You get this guy shot, and this guy rebounded it, and this guy turned it over. Like, a whole lot happened in that 15-second increment in between that honestly we just don't have much data for, other than it was these 5 versus these 5, but we don't know what happened. That's why, like, at the end of the day, until that moment, you still sort of rely on people who are in that fight every day, and you rely on your coaches who've seen that. We wouldn't go back 50 years and say, data is better than coaches. We'd say, like, no, only after coaches have like beat up these ideas for several decades would data ever help and help make that better. But it just sees a really limited portion. The good news is it sees really deeply, but it sees a pretty narrow set of what's available right now. So I think there's a lot out there that we still don't know.
I'll throw out some words to you guys, and we hear all the time in our coaches meetings, and if you guys can ever quantify any of this stuff, I can't tell you how much it's worth. Energy, awareness, intelligence, decision-making, sort of all these intangibles that we can't quantify. I know as coaches we can't quantify, and we differ on our opinions on what they are and what each player brings, and when we're talking about that term, and and how do we get our players better at these things, especially decision making? Will it ever get to the point where it becomes so scientific where we can read, A, B, and C? We have 3 decisions to make, and we pick out the right one. How can we get our guys to do better on the weak side? Weak side defense. How aware is a guy? And you say, well, where? What does that mean? Is he in a defensive positions, or his hands out? Is it? So it just seems so random. And our coaches, well, he's not aware. He's not smart. He doesn't bring energy, or in a positive sense, either way. So, to me, I don't know, and I think I mentioned to you in the email, is there, do you guys have anything that can track that stuff, that can help us as coaches evaluate it when we draft, evaluate what we have and what we need to get rid of?
Well, yeah, another early story for me was, again, one of the first things Rick, when we were discussing things I could track, was he was like, I would like you to track playing hard. I've got all these very specific stats I'm thinking about maybe would be useful, and it's like playing hard, hard play. So, it's a challenge. There's definitely a lot of it is kind of a bit more ethereal or something, what the coach mentality is about, and trying to capture something that is very difficult to track. I do think you can get kind of little steps towards it. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, my goal is not to come in and I mean, I think a lot of people are trying to hit like a home run or even more. They're trying to hit, 6 home runs on the first pitch. And I'm really just trying to make these incremental small things which can just be added into the mix and, hopefully promote some conversation and thing that maybe gets us to an improved area and whatever it is. But yeah, it's very tricky. And I mean, it's a challenge still to get the nuance. I mean, we look at, you may try and send the player a specific way because he's stronger going one way than the other. But it's a great how strongly do you want to send it that way. If you open up too wide, you just give them the blow by to the rim. So you've got to kind of balance, your angle of the stance and things. So there's just a ton of nuance. And so I'm completely with Sam. I mean, I think there's amazing amounts still to be captured. I mean, the thing that really excited me today at the conference was the soccer data, seeing that there's been this effort to really capture a lot of detail in a sport, which to me, and I'm not a big soccer knowledgeable guy, but it seems like there's so little information out there that now to have these things where you can look at, the pass through, and I mean, Sarah's presentation was great where, I mean, even like the goal scoring rate on a corner kick is something I've never really seen before. Does actually have a percentage on that as a stats guy, you can then start valuing what's it worth to get a corner kick for us. So it's a lot of it to me is a data. I mean, Daryl had a thing on the blog about it's really a data-driven process to find the right data that then the coaches are going to say, this is useful to me, and I can, make some adjustment to our plans from here.
To both your points, people often say, like, what's the one number if you really could have, you really want? And I tell them, like, I don't actually have one that is achievable, but I know what I want. What I want is the sum total score of every basketball game you've ever played since you were like 10 years old. Every game of pickup, every game of 2-on-2 and 1-on-1 and 3-on-3, because I think that would capture a lot of this. It would capture your skill, of course, but it would capture playing hard and your energy and your awareness in the sense that, like, you don't lose and you care about every practice that's going on, and you care about every game of pickup when you were 15, and you care about every day in the off season between every NBA season. Like, that's what we want. It's not achievable by any stretch, but that's the sort of thing often we're after, is some way to say, how do we capture, not just can this guy score or rebound, we can measure those things reasonably well. We're trying to capture, how do these guys really impact winning in a way that everyone can agree, our coaches and his teammates and everyone can agree will drive winning going forward.
Are adjusted plus-minus formulas the best hope for that? I mean, theoretically, Nick Collison, I can say Nick Collison, they could not. This guy on the Oklahoma City Thunder puts up very few counting stats, but his team is awesome when he's on the court and stinks when he's off the court, or relatively speaking stinks. That's captured quantitatively in various plus-minus formulas. I mean, is that the best hope we have at getting at intangibles like playing hard, or are there other ways to do that?
I'm not the hugest plus-minus fan, even though actually that was one of the first things I threw up on my website. But no, I think there's a lot you can track to try and get to these things, which are hard to get to, and the plus minus does capture some information, but there's so many issues with, the length of time you need and the complexity of player interactions and stuff. I'm actually not a big advocate of, I'll look at it, but I really don't, especially being in more the coaching side, that's nothing that's really a big focus for us on the coaching day-to-day stuff.
Even the five-man units? Because the big thing about Rick in the playoffs was, a lot was written about he clearly understands, what lineups are working and what aren't, and is coaching to those numbers. Maybe that was just the stat head's hope that wasn't actually true.
Well, no, we pay attention to lineups. I mean, for me, the adjusted plus minus, the problem in part is you're trying to find the constant value for a player. And I just don't believe that's true. I mean, that really undermines coaching to think like that, because coaching can impact things so many different ways that, we don't believe in this notion of constant value necessarily. You're trying to find the right balance and the right chemistry and the right play calls and the right defensive schemes and everything to work together optimally. But again, I'm not really much on the front office side. It's obviously a different ball game to what you're trying to do, but we look at plus minus, but it's not a big emphasis by any means on the coaching side, I think.
I mean, that leads me to my next question, which might be, we might open it up after this, but to me, there's no more unsophisticated dialogue or no less sophisticated dialogue in the media and the public than the one about coaches and what coach is doing a good job and what coach is doing a bad job is just so much nonsense and hindsight and you sort of empty judgment. And I guess that's when, like, Kenny, you're a coach. Roland, you're on the coaching staff. Sam, you interact with the coaching staff, and you just hired a new coach. How do we know who's a good coach other than, you know, Phil Jackson has X amount of rings and you know, Doc Rivers seems to do well and all that? Like, is that an area where we've barely scratched the surface? And literally, how do we know? How do we know who's a good coach?
I'll definitely defer to you on that.
I would say it's indicative of maybe the way we think about the game or think about players too, is like what portion of it is under their control, right? So there's all these factors that the best coach in the world or the worst coach in the world had no impact on, injuries or the schedule or a call or all these other things. You know, a player takes a shot and that shot's looking like it's online and it's going to go in, and whether it goes in or out, oftentimes that particular shot is really random. And so being able to sort of separate out those two will at least leave you with things that coaches can surely control, and you could surely measure those and say which ones have done things in a way that look closer to optimal and which ones have not, or which ones have learned over time, right? You don't particularly care about a coach who has always had the perfect answer forever. You care about a coach that is most likely to have the perfect answer next time. And so, you know, someone who's been trending up over his career or has seen real step changes in his career about the way he gets his teams to perform in those narrow areas that he can control, I would say we would look at those kind of things heavily. But it doesn't line up with the standings or the playoffs at the end of the year perfectly, just because this team won in the finals or lost in the finals or the like. You know, there's a whole lot of factors. Our coach, Coach Adelman, I thought said it well one time. They were asking him about, you know, what if you finish your career and you never win a title? And he would say, I know a lot of guys who have rings who aren't winners that I wouldn't classify as winners. And like I think that's true a lot, in that if you just look and say, well, these are the best 5 assistants and this is the best head coach and these are the best front offices based on what happened at the end of the year, you're likely to be just lumping everything in together. It's a really simple way to do it, but you're likely to miss a lot of stuff too.
What coaches, you know, what coaching staffs, now I'm a little biased on this because I have a player development background, but are improving players under their system from an individual standpoint. I don't think that's talked about enough. I don't know the value of it. I've read things where, you know, saying, you know, ranking the top coaches that get their players to perform the best when they're under their system. So I haven't seen a lot of talk about that and how teams develop their players, and how do they do under their system compared to previous teams, and after they leave that program, how do they, you know, what is the value of that? You know, what is the value of player development and performing under a certain system?
Yeah, I mean, I think coaches have so many different roles in which they influence a team, and I mean, people can be good in obviously some areas and not others. I mean, you've got to be looking at, you know, player development. How effective are your practices in terms of, you know, getting across the concepts for maybe the long term and also that immediate game. I mean, motivation is obviously a huge thing, and motivation is tricky because you have to be very original and fresh with ideas. I mean, you can't just be I remember early on we lost a game badly and we played badly against, you know, a team we thought we'd beat, and we came back the next game and we looked over the game. We thought we were really not doing a good job on offense setting and holding the screens. We weren't setting good screens, and so we made that a big emphasis of practice. We're going to set good screens, and that night we went out, we set great screens, we got great results, and I'm like, you know, eureka. But we tried the same message, you know, a few weeks later, and it was totally flat. It didn't really work again. So, you know, it's a really daunting task to be a great coach, I think, because there's so many levels at which you have to be operating And again, you're taking input from all these people, and you're having to filter what you're going to pay attention to. In some games, obviously there's a mastering the timeout usage, and there's all kinds of detail for a coach's life. And it really is a 7-day-a-week job for people who are in the business. So it's a really high-intensity job, and not without emotion. I was surprised when I first got there, thinking we had these guys who've been coaching for decades. They'd be pretty calm and emotionless about things, the up and down stuff, and it wasn't that way at all. There'd be like these huge mood swings after every game. It's like, I have amazing respect for what coaches do, because they are operating on so many things at once. And obviously there's a lot of unfair criticism thrown at coaches oftentimes, but yeah, it's very difficult to really rate coaches, particularly because it could be very different with a different team. So it's, it's a tough thing.
I think we're gonna, if people in the audience have questions, I think there are microphones that they are gonna walk around with and stuff.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was a fantastic discussion. So, a lot of us in this audience do some pretty extraordinarily fancy things, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of the things that's on some of our minds is that when we develop some pretty fancy models and algorithms to answer, sort of the questions that you're primarily interested in, how receptive are you guys in the front office to, working with very fancy kinds of statistical analyses? Not necessarily the kind where you just look at a number like an adjusted plus minus, but things that are much more involved. Where does that translation occur?
We're very open. Email samh@rocketball.com. I would be happy to reply. We're very open, and often we actually have a list where people send in ideas to the Rockets, and it's literally just trying to crowdsource ideas. And I hoped it would be academia. It turned out to be 7 p.m. was 7 a.m. in Shanghai, and it was just a bunch of angry Chinese fans at the time. But we're like yearning for help, especially the free kind. So please reach out.
Yeah, I think we welcome originality very strongly. The problem is, again, the coaching, it's not really about ranking or ordering, which seems to be so much the focus of what people's research is about. It's much more about things you can actually take and, apply to, hopefully improve the next outcome for the team. So it's, it's a little different, I think, in what we're looking for. But yeah, original ideas. And again, I really encourage just small steps. You don't have to create some massive, thing that's going to revolutionize the NBA overnight, because I don't think that's possible. But you may find something small about, one little area of the game that can be actually very significant, and something that maybe you can somehow apply to actually bring about, improvement.
I had a question aimed, I guess, primarily towards Kenny, since I've seen the Knicks as sort of a freewheeling offensive team, and in the past, and I've seen players like Nate Robinson and Gallinari and maybe now Carmelo, who as a fan and a statistician take shots that I would say, geez, that just can't be optimal, and I'm wondering like when those those types of things occur on the court, do those conversations happen, about was this a bad decision on the court, but or you're taking too many bad shots? Does that conversation occur between you and the coaches, and does that conversation occur between the coaches and the players, that sort of thing?
It's
where I'm heading with that?
Great question, because that's the constant debate we have, and it becomes the wild, wild west. And where we have a lot of coaches in the room, and there's a lot of different opinions on what a good shot is. And the side I like to come from normally is the statistical side. Like from a statistical standpoint, that's a pretty good shot. And I can't talk about a player specifically, but I would say our style of play is very much influenced by statistical information and data, offensive style of play and defensive style of play. And I think these guys would agree. They're the kind of the forerunners. But And there's no doubt about it, if we feel like a certain player is not taking good shots, we'll show them A, the data, and B, we'll back that up with video. So I think in the past it used to be, where it's kind of the barber shop coach, where we just kind of, you're just kind of saying, oh, you're not taking good shots. Well, what does that mean? They're looking at you like, number one, who are you? Especially if you're not a great ex-player. Like, who are you? So this is why this is so great, because now we have some, stuff to back us up. And you got to smile. You got your stuff with you. You got your video guy trailing you. And we're going right to player B. And we're showing him the stuff. And I cannot tell you how much it's improved players that I've been with and talking to other guys on other teams that use this stuff. It's a huge tool for us. But unfortunately, there's probably too much debate and too much time wasted on, your idea of a good shot and my idea of a good shot are probably two different things. And your idea of freewheeling might be my idea of like, you know what, we like that. Again, it's a public perception, general media perception, and we kind of think, hey, we have an advantage because we use this stuff, and it gives us an advantage. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
This question is for Roland mostly. Mark Cuban has talked at previous conferences about intangibles and sort of how, like, he thinks that the psychological evaluation of players and things like that is the next frontier. Have you guys, to whatever extent you can discuss this, is that something that is incorporated statistically in what you do, or is that still kind of done on outside of the statistics, just done by psychological professionals, or do you actually have, tests that you run on players or after games or any point?
I don't get too much involved in that, but we do have a team psychologist, and I mean, we're definitely conscious of being open to all kinds of ideas, I think. But yeah, it's nothing I've personally looked at.
Hey guys, I had a question. Zach alluded to Moneyball coming out, all the articles kind of looking back 10 years. I haven't seen quite as many about looking forward 10, 20, 25 years, and I was kind of wondering what sorts of things you think that we as a community can be doing so that people are less talking about Roland as the stats coach and on each team, and it's more like everyone's a coach who's using stats, and it's not so much about here are some of the players that are receptive, but it would sound just as crazy in the future to talk about players that are receptive to stats as it might be to talk about players that are receptive to cell phones or email today, right? Like sort of everybody's pretty much using it. So I was wondering whether you think there's things that we should be doing to kind of help get it more ingrained or just more, everybody more comfortable as, a new generation rises up.
You want to take that, sir?
Odd man out. I would say, as the community in general, I often preach simplifying, not the analysis, the communication of it, right? So if you can't find a pithy way to say it in 20 seconds, or you can't find a way to say it in 3 sentences in an email, there's a natural limit to how far it will go. And they will probably, in our organization, stop with me, because it won't get any, if you won't do it, I'll do it for you. I'll read it and make 2 pithy sentences and hit our coach with it at the next reasonable time to talk with him about it. So I would say that is a big one. We were joking the other day, there's all this advanced data that went into things that seem like really simple now, like weather prediction. But what our coaches use, no matter their age, is they get on their iPhone and on the home screen they hit weather in their city, and it just says high and low and if it's going to rain or not. They don't need all the math that went into predicting that, and we could argue about whether those predictions are awesome or not, but they just know it's going to rain today, and high is 80, low is 60. I think as a community, that's the thing to do. I think in general though, you won't have to do much. We find, Kenny alluded to this earlier, we find the young players, this stuff is really straightforward. They've been reading kenpom.com in college. They've been on Google their entire adolescent life. This is simple stuff for them, and so the thought that all this data might not help me, it's helped them find a date on Match.com, or it's helped them find something else somewhere else. So to them, the really young guys, I think is pretty simple. They're yeah, of course, I want to know what I'm shooting in this area, or I want to know why I'm not helping the team, or I want to know what I can do better. So I think over time, as more and more players largely come into the league, that will be simpler.
Kind of speaking along the lines of the previous question, do you guys have the kind of infrastructure set up that you kind of have different data sources talking to each other? And are you willing to kind of grow your analytics teams to kind of make optimized decisions? Like, I'm coming from a business, like insurance background, so it's not sports related, but there's a lot of emphasis there in kind of having good data, quality data, and then kind of being able of all these systems to talk to each other and make informed decisions based on that. For that to happen also, you probably need larger analytics teams and you need more sophisticated models like the first question was asked. How open are you to kind of these kinds of developments? And like the psychological role was, but you can have medical information for certain players. So there was a lot of focus on kind of individual play within a game situation, but I think there's a possibility of kind of looking at things a lot more from a holistic perspective, from a lot more angles, and how willing are you to go that route?
I mean, we're always trying to see all the angles, but as Sam says, it's really about communicating in a very clear, concise fashion. You can't come in with just scads of things to look at. I mean, there's very limited time to go through everything we're trying to get accomplished. But no, I think every team is always trying to get all the effective information they can together in a fashion that's, merged or blended together in the best way. So, I think everyone's looking to that end. But ultimately, the messages have to be pretty simple. You've really got to get it down to something that's easy to understand and communicate, and also actionable. People don't want to hear stuff that they can't really do anything about. So it's like you gotta get to something that's got a punch to it.
I would say it differs heavily organization to organization and owner by owner. And it's changing a lot, as you might expect, but that's a decision for each owner. We're only in the position we're in because our owner is a bit of a visionary in this sense, in that he's a trader by nature and has used data his whole life to make decisions. And so he was a relatively early investor in this sort of thing. And I think as you see across all sports, basketball included, as you see ownership change, then I think those are often the opportunities. If the people that own sports franchises came from steel mills or came from trucking companies or the like, and they made all this money in the 50s and 60s, that sort of sets your organization on a certain path or a certain ethos. If the people that can afford the franchises today that cost $4 or $5 or $6 or $800 million, they're doing two things. One, a lot of that money is new, so they've made money on internet companies or in venture capital or in private equity or in hedge funds. And the other thing you're seeing is like it's hard to afford. It's a lot of money. And so they syndicate it. And so they get lots and lots of people involved, which only makes that, I think, more likely. It's one thing to have one wealthy owner who comes from a particular industry. It's another thing to have 28 wealthy owners, 25 of which come from industries where every decision they make, they look at lots of data and they say, do I trust this over everything? Of course not. I trust the people I hired to work for me because I think they exhibit the characteristics that I want in our leaders. But guess what? I'm going to ask a whole lot of questions about the research that backs this up and all the ways we could be wrong and all the sensitivities to this. So I think that really is dependent owner to owner.
I'm interested in how involved you are in picking draft choices. In particular, if you are, where do you get that data?
I think that's you. I'm afraid that's me. These guys live and breathe coaching. I'm in our front office, so we're heavily involved in that. That's sort of you could argue, our primary function. The data is worse, as you might imagine. There's not as much of it. It's harder to get, but that doesn't mean the effort is fruitless. So it exists, and there's data out there that you can use. I would say often what we try to do, and maybe you could call this short-sighted, maybe we should be trying a disruptive leap bigger than this. We try to mimic largely what we have on the NBA side to the extent we can. You have to find cost-effective ways to do that, and not all that data is the same, but we would try to get our college data as close to we can to being onto the standard of our NBA data. That's not without a whole bunch of effort and sort of grabbing it scraping it here and buying some of it here and grabbing it from a variety of places to bring together. The good news is if you have an infrastructure to do that, then now you've taken all this data and you can produce the same sort of stuff you produce in the NBA that you know works in basketball, and you can produce it to say its impact on the college game or on the international game.
How much do you guys get to experiment with new ideas and different things? Like, if you guys have a new idea for the coach and you propose it, like during the regular season, is there some flexibility to say, for hell, let's just try this out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the coaching staff and the situation of the team within the season. But yeah, and I think, open-mindedness is pretty rampant. I don't think people are really unwilling with, convincing kind of support for why you'd want to do something. I don't think you're going to have a hard time once you've got kind of credibility to at least get heard. It doesn't mean it will be accepted or anything. But coaches' meetings have a lot of debate and discussion, and obviously if you've been trying something that isn't working well, you're more likely to be able to get an attempt to try something different than if you're saying, I think it'll be even better than something that's working well already. But no, I found, over time, I think everyone's looking to do the best for their team, so anything that's going to help that is going to be considered.
I'm thinking more like, instead of being retrospective, being prospective. I want to try this out now because this is some crazy theory we have and we're going to give it a go. Not like, oh, this is what happened last game, so to correct where we want to do this.
Well, I mean, the argument is, what's your evidence for thinking it's a good idea, right? You got to present why you think it's a good idea. You can't just throw out random experiments like, let's only take 3-point shots this game and see what happens. I mean, you're not going to get far on that. But if you have some idea, and again, it's probably more of a small thing. It's maybe more of a, let's space the court a little differently. I mean, something small would be something you'd suggest. And, you don't go and challenge. People don't just say, okay, you got to have backbone to stand up for what you're saying, and you got to have convincing kind of reasons for thinking it's going to be a good thing to do. But I found once I got past the kind of initial stages, I think people are very receptive to ideas if they're well constructed and well thought out.
I yearn for that. I yearn for a place where you could do that kind of experimentation. That our games are too important to our owner and to our fans to do that sort of thing, but it would be wonderful to have that, such that we get caught up in this idea of you're a genius if you have a great idea, or you're some visionary, versus just saying, like, let's try 10 ideas and the one that works the best, let's roll with that one because it might not have been intuitive to start with. We have a minor league team that we're affiliated with that we made that investment in part because of that, to have a place for experimentation where it was largely lower risk. That's not the only part. Player development's a big part of that as well, but we've done some of that there. But yeah, in a perfect world, I would love to have lots of places you could do those kinds of simulations. Some people on our list, when they email in ideas, they say, like, run simulated practices or simulated games, with the players who don't play. So take your guys 11 through 15 and run a simulated game, and let Kenny be the head coach of that team and let somebody else be the head coach of this team, and keep the stats and keep all the data, and say, when you get to the end of the year and you've got some rookie on a great team like the Mavs, you don't say, like, oh, this guy was compliant in practice all the time and played 20 minutes of NBA data. You're like, no, he's played 500 or 1,000 minutes of simulated data, and we know how he performed in that environment, which surely isn't as good as this one, but like, you'd love to be able to try some of those things there. There's not a lot of that happens, but I think we'd be better off if we could find a way where we could.
So in a broader sense, more and more teams are now doing analytics, and it seems like a lot of what can be done easily with the existing data has been done. I'm sure there are small incremental improvements. So I agree that there's a lot that we don't know and can learn, but I'm wondering, what do you guys think the returns to basketball analytics will be in the future? Because it seems to me that it's going to be harder and harder, and you're going to have to put more time in and more effort to get that data or get the next advance.
I disagree. I think actually there's, for me, so many exciting avenues to explore. I mean, I find I constantly have ideas, or like you were saying, you have like 10 ideas sometimes, and it's like, I don't think there's any shortage of innovation. going on in the NBA. And again, I think there's so many areas of data we don't have data, or even something like a drill in practice. I mean, there's fairly standard drills that a lot of teams I think do, but there's also, again, you'll sometimes think, well, we want to kind of address this area. What's a drill we can come up with that, maybe is something we haven't really tried before, and we'll actually spend 20 minutes kind of playing through what the drill might be and how how it would work, and then we go out and we do it.
I had an idea the other. We're working heavily with a sports science team right now, and I'm again in player development, and we're talking about when you're practicing with a guy, what conditions should that be under, and one of my things was like, well, we're talking about heart rate and what your average heart rate is during the game, acceleration. So there's a lot of different things you can chart. Well, I'm like, gosh, if we knew like what the average heart rate that a guy shoots at, during a game or during the fourth quarter or during the third quarter, like when I'm doing shooting after practice with player X and he's at a resting heart rate, like how efficient is that? Am I is that really game similar to a game, or am I better saying, man, if we knew the exact heart rate of our wing, and it's probably position related, your centers are going to be different than your guards, and so if we had like something like that, I don't know if that makes sense, if we had that data, that would be really interesting in terms of how I trained a player or what I did with him, and there's just, again, every day there's questions like that.
I'll say I'm a big believer that teams that choose to find an advantage there. You could argue over time, if that advantage could be eroded, but I think teams could choose to. But then secondly, I think largely it will just sort of become a cost of doing business. And these are like massively competitive people and really in a competitive dynamic. So similar to if FedEx starts sending you emails saying, your package is halfway there and it got to this location, it doesn't take UPS long to say we have to do that too, because they're doing it and we don't want everyone to shift to them, so they're competitive, so they do it. I think the same will happen here, where a lot of people have made investments knowing that the winning and losing is a big part of it, and over time I think they'll say if we're the only one not doing any of this, then this will be considered a new cost of what it takes.
But what you guys are getting at is going to be more of a union between my side. You guys are talking about the future. I mean, this is coming together like this. I think our community's coming together, and you added about the psychology community. It's all coming together, and the more you bring that together, the more ideas you're going to have, the more advance you're going to have. So it's happening. I just these guys started it. I think you're just going to see it's going to go, and really quickly. It's an opinion.
The emphasis so far during this conversation has been about how analytics can help coaches and players do better. But it seems like another area that analytics would be very important, it's almost unmentioned, is evaluating player talent and evaluating the good trades. And I guess a little was said about drafts. But anyway, I wonder why that's been so left out, and is there any thing to say positive about what can be done?
Maybe because that's the hardest thing to. It's at Sam. You
maybe I think a construct of the panel as well, in that these guys sort of live and die with our coaches every day because they are coaches. If this panel had a couple of GMs, I think the conversation would have been largely similar. And to Kenny's example, I think you'd say things are even closer already, in that GMs have had the first incentive to sort of listen to find ways that data might help them. That's how most of us even got there, including Kenny. How Kenny got to the Rockets when we were out looking for a coach, is to sort of bring that together. But that's a huge part, and honestly probably the first place that a team starts when they invest in that space. That's the first thing they do, is help us decide how to value this free agent, or help us think about this trade, or help us think about who to draft.
Much of the information that you have is proprietary, so you can't share it with each other. Let's suppose we're in a counterfactual world that you all sit down and share everything with each other. What is that world going to look like for NBA basketball? How will it be
won't
different?
happen.
It's counterfactual.
It's a competitive game, so yeah, I don't know.
It's funny, the coaching community, the old school way of thinking was we share everything. Tactics, you know, what our theories are on offense and defense. And I see coaches starting to go proprietary too, like keeping their and you know, it's not as maybe as important, but it used to be, hey, that was our community. We shared everything. We sat down, we went to big clinics, but you see a lot less of that today, and you know.
Except for people who change teams a lot. Obviously, coaches will spread around the league to different teams, and then it kind of gets spread that way. But you would certainly know more about the old school.
I wonder, do you have data on, for example, you've got a player, let's call him Antoine Walker, and you spent 15 minutes with him looking at video and discussing the offensive moves of the player he's going to be matched up in the next game. And at the end of the season, you've got 45 games. You've got a record that in these 45 games, you spent 15 minutes with Antoine Walker, focused on the offensive skills and propensities of his next opponent, and you've got 37 games where you didn't spend those 15 minutes. Clearly, we can all see that there's some scope for analysis there, but I'm wondering, are you guys beginning to collect any of that kind of data on what is the practice time spent on so that you could move in that direction?
We haven't done this with much rigor as much as you're suggesting, but I'm constantly asking our coaches, like, let's find the learning styles of each of these guys. And I don't mean in a textbook sort of educational way. I mean, like, some of these guys like video and they get it if it's in quick bursts. Some of them don't. Some of them like video when it arrives in their email and they can just click on it like YouTube. Some of them I don't think they learn on the whiteboard very well, and they sort of draw up a play and say, this is you and this is where you're going. I don't think that's natural for all of our players. Some are on the floor, and if they're actually physically doing it, they do better. So I'm constantly urging them to experiment in that way. I'm not keeping track the way I likely should. But I think we sort of one size fits all, which is I stand, I talk, you guys listen, surely you got all that, and then we walk away, versus being more willing to say, like, I'm not treating him specially, but he'll only figure these plays out if we run him through it, or he'll only figure these plays out if I take him aside quietly when all of his teammates don't know that he's with me, and show him a few videos of his teammates doing it better, or of him making mistakes, or of him doing positive things.
And do we have enough manpower to? That's really the question. I think you're getting a great point. And where are we going to get to maybe outsourcing this? I don't know. I know in how, like I think I said before, just looking at one game, that's 2 hours. I can't imagine like taking your 13th guy who the owner has spent a lot of money on. So what you're saying is we should be putting in more time to watching every possession, more particularly, and not missing 1 minute on the offense or defensive side. So I think that's part of the future, being more precise in that stuff and having more manpower.
Well, I'll preface this by saying the sports are like massively different, as all of our coaches and players would say. But like if we were like the NFL, we would have like a point guards coach and a shooting guards coach and a power forward coach, and each of the power forwards would go into the power forward film room and watch an hour of power forward tape on their practice from that day and on their game this week, and then they'd take a power forward test before the game to make sure they've proven that they can meet the minimum requirements of knowing the plays. Like that, you say, Kenny says that in the locker room, that sounds pretty draconian to a lot of our guys, but it's done in another sport that way. And I think you could make some arguments. You definitely see player development staffs growing, for example. You see that, like, people that will invest time in these guys that the organization is clearly invested in, but yet they don't get the actual experience on the floor, whether it's through the minor league system or through more player development coaches. You definitely see teams doing that. I wouldn't be surprised to see things grow even a little larger.
The player development coach mentioned heart rate monitors and sports science. Is that for injury prevention? And overall, where are you for analytics related to injury prevention?
I wish our sports science guy was here. But definitely injury prevention, I know that. we look at it from simulating our practices, advancing our team. But I know, and this is a touchy subject because it's a lot of propriety stuff. So I don't know, where are you guys with that? First, I'm going to tell you, you're onto something, and I think it's and I know a lot of the soccer teams are doing, combining the two worlds, the sports science world, heart rate monitors. I think the NBA's, you're going to see a big movement in that direction. It's another part. I know we're 2 years into it, and it's really helped us.
Soccer's a place where, they're well ahead of I think, all American sports on that front, such that the players wear monitors, and it sort of runs through an algorithm, and then it tells the coach who's available to play. All right, that's a very different dynamic than what we see in the NBA, to go to the head coach and say, the computer says he might get hurt today, so he can't play. But that's where soccer is. I would say analytically, I'm not afraid to say we're poor. That's one of those areas we don't know a whole lot. Right? We can all look back, go to Basketball Reference and look back at the games missed or the minutes missed of a guy and think about particular injuries and catalog all that info, but I don't think we have a lot of predictive power and that sort of stuff at all, whether it's young players or old players. So we struggle. One way is throw up your hands. Something we've invested in is sort of trying to hedge that risk as best we can by saying let's not have players that can only play one position all 82 games. Like that, inevitably, when the unknown injury that we admittedly can't predict happens, then we'll be stuck and we'll have to make all these other changes versus saying this guy can play a little here and a little there and could play spot minutes for you at several positions if need be. Our approach has been more on that front, which is defeatist in the sense that we still don't have a good way to predict injuries, but I think the best we can do in the interim until we get better data. Largely we can't predict injuries because we have terrible data over the years of when players were injured, not only federal regulations, but just what's been reported and collected. So we don't know if a guy, especially like in the mid-'90s, if a guy missed with a bad back because he actually had a bad back, or if he missed because they just wanted him on the injured list and he wasn't in the first 12 and they just call it a bad back. So our historical data set is pretty bad there, which I think really limits us.
Speaking of the 13th man idea, are you putting in player development hours and I guess your own time and money to even some extent proportional to how important that player is impact-wise on the team, or even money-wise? Like if you hire that new big free agent, are you going to spend more development time with them, inevitably?
Or do you spend more time with the guy that's a free agent? That's a great question, and one we struggle with all the time. I don't know as far as the investing goes and money-wise.
Well, I mean just more hours. Like, how a teacher looks at the worst student, says, my goal is to make that student better, as opposed to, I got my star students, I already know he's good.
Sometimes the problem with your best students, they don't think they need a lot of player development. That's a dilemma, but I think your job as a coach is to convince those guys that they do need it and that you can help them and using every tool possible to get them better. And you're probably, you should be maybe putting more manpower. I never really thought about it. And it's, where we are right now, it's not quantified enough. It's not, quadrant off like you're talking about. Like this coach has got to spend 17 hours in these 2 weeks. It hasn't gotten to that point, and it'd be interesting to get there.
This one's kind of general, but with your interactions with other people, do you find that a lot of people are looking for you to use data to just confirm what they already know or what they think they know, or do people kind of come in with an open mind saying, I don't really know the answer, what can you tell me?
It varies again. Often there's an inquiry where they have a belief, a coach will have a belief, and if you have data to kind of look at something, that's obviously great. You can go grab some data that kind of explore a specific, area or a specific request. But yeah, I there's no resistance to data. It's not like they don't want to hear the numbers. They just want to hold on to a belief. You know, if they have an idea that they come to you to check out, they're obviously looking to get some information from you that can show them one way or the other.
Looks like that's it. Thanks, guys. You know, it's good to have you talking about the NBA. It's nice.
So a couple of small things before we adjourn for the day. First of all, is Ben Alomar here? Ben, you want to just come quickly and give just a quick comments about JQAS?
So the Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sports, which apparently needs a new acronym, we'll be publishing a special issue from the proceedings of this conference for the third time. And for authors, the deadline, we have a new editor of the journal. Happy to say that my last issue will be this coming October. I'll publish my last issue as the editor. And Jim Albert of Bowling Green will be taking over as editor. The due date for all papers from this conference is December 2nd. And I know that Jim will be looking forward to reviewing everything and putting out again, another wonderful issue from this conference. So please do submit. Thank you.
So one last comment is that, so we are, for those of you who are available, we do invite you to join us at Tavern in the Square in Porter Square. The people there are expecting you to say that you're part of the Sports Statistics Conference. So when you go in there, mention that, and they'll put you in the back. And so the plan is to try to aim to be there 7-ish or so, but we'll probably be there for a while. So please join us. Thank you once again for coming to NESSIS, and mark it on your calendar for 2 years from now. We'll have it again. Thank you very much.